Hi everyone, Miss Conley here again. So this week we are working on Unit 1, Week 2, and we're going to do our read aloud today. And our read aloud is going to focus on rereading a passage or part of a passage for the answer. So you're going to need a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen of some sort. So go ahead and grab a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen and pause the video. And when you're ready, come on back. Okay, so you should have everything you need. So last week when we did the read aloud, we talked about rereading for evidence, and we're going to work on that again this week. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And we are going to start reading a story called Lost in the Museum Wings. So if you guys have ever been to the Carnegie Museum, you know how easy it is in a big building like that. The genre this week that we are working on is also called realistic fiction. So realistic fiction is just that. We know that fiction is a made-up story, and if something is realistic, it means it could really happen. So we're reading a story about kids that got lost in a museum, and even though it's not a real person or a real place or real students, it could still happen in real life. So let me go to the one page, we'll zoom in. And so there up at the top is realistic fiction. So the title is Lost in the Museum Wings. So follow along as I read out loud. James, called Miss Roberts, please keep up with the rest of the group. How am I ever going to accomplish keeping everyone together? She wondered, when at every turn there's something interesting to see. As she waited for her distracted son to catch up, she peered into a nearby display of gemstones, all the while keeping a watchful eye on her three other charges as they browsed the Hall of Minerals. When James caught up, she gathered Caitlin, Ian, and Emmy, and they continued along the rest of the class and chaperones into the museum's meteor maze. Before they entered, James tapped Caitlin and pointed behind her. "Look," he whispered. "Butterflies." Ian and Emmy overheard, and all three turned around to look. Two orange and black butterflies fluttered across the hall, and the children giggled. "What's all the fuss?" Miss Roberts asked. "James just saw two butterflies," Ian explained. "Over there." Okay, let's go to the next page and keep on reading. Now look, there she is, all in a museum. We got to pay attention to the illustrations as well. In here? That's odd. Miss Roberts turned to look too, but all she saw was a flood of visitors pouring out of the hall. Then she noticed the back of a boy's head moving away from the group and immediately recognized it. James! When she looked back, the class was already making their way through the meteor maze. She'd have to act fast to get her son and catch up to the class. She gathered the three and said, "Come with me. I've got to go get James. Now let's stay together." Okay, we're going to stop right there. Now, in paragraph 1, which is the very, very top paragraph, we need to know or circle a phrase that helps us visualize how many people are at a museum. So what idiom, and we're working on idioms this week also, what idiom is there that helps us recognize how many people are in this museum? And remember, an idiom is comparing something without using like or as. So pause the video, circle how many visitors or people are in the museum, and then we'll come back together. Okay, if you circled a flood of visitors pouring out of the hall, you are correct. Because if there is a flood, think of a real flood, right? With water. There's water everywhere. Maybe you watched a movie. Maybe you watched a YouTube video of it raining real hard and then all of a sudden a flood coming. But when there's a flood of water, there's a lot of water, a ton of water. So if there's a flood of visitors pouring out of the hall, that means that there's just people coming out of this room and going into the hallway nonstop, right? So there's a lot of people there at this museum. Would you agree? I agree. Okay. In paragraph number 2 now, which is that next paragraph, we need to write down 3 things that she has to do, Miss Roberts. Okay, so we know there's a ton of people in the museum. We know her son James was kind of not really paying attention to what she was doing, right? He was kind of looking at things and doing all that kind of stuff. He was pretty distracted. So now in paragraph number 2, let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger. There we go. So in paragraph number 2, we need to find 3 things that Miss Roberts has to do. So that's what we're going to do. Pause the video and write down 3 things that she has to do. When you're ready and you got your 3 answers, let's come back together and unpause the video. Okay, do you have your 3 things? So if you said that first, she has to find her son or catch up to her son, you're correct. So that's number 1. She has to get her son, because we said that he was distracted and that she noticed the back of a boy's head moving away from the group. So right, so he's kind of going this way, she's going this way, and she needs to get to him. Good answer. Okay, number 2, she also has to catch up to the rest of the class. So she has to get her son, then catch up to the rest of the class, right? Because it's a field trip, everybody needs to kind of stick together. And then the last one, she has to make their way through the meteor maze. So she has to get her son, make their way through the meteor maze, and catch up to the rest of the class. Those are the 3 answers we need. If you have those 3 answers, great job. Okay, and the last question here. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We got to keep on reading just a little bit longer. Together, they hurried down the hall and caught up with James as he was rounding the corner into the coral corridor. James, you can't just wander off when you know we must all stay together as a group, Miss Roberts chided. Sorry, I wanted to get a look at those butterflies, James explained. The 5 retraced their steps, but when they returned, the meteor maze had now been roped off. A sign read, Last tour, 1 p.m. Now how do we find them? Miss Roberts wondered out loud. I know, Caitlin said. Our teacher said we would visit the Monarchs exhibit next and assemble by the bus at 2 o'clock to return to school. Miss Roberts looked at her watch. 1:15. They would have to hurry. Please, where's the exhibit on monarchs? She asked, approaching a guard. Go down the end of this hall, the guard directed. But before you get to the end, take a right, just past the ancient dynasties. Okay, let me make this just a little bit smaller. Now, you have to find out, why did James wander off? What was he doing? What was he so interested in? Why did James wander off? Pause the video, write down your answer. Whenever you're ready, unpause the video. Okay, so what was he wandering off for? What was he so enthused by that he couldn't wait? He just had to see them. Now, if you said butterflies, you are correct. So that's kind of right here in the middle of the page. He said, if we go back, reread the page, we found the evidence in the middle. It says, sorry, I wanted to get a look at those butterflies, James explained. So he wanted to go look at the butterflies. Okay. You can't turn the page. I guess I will turn the page. I keep forgetting that we're being recorded here. Oh, look at them rushing through. She's looking at her watch. We're going through the ancient dynasty display of the monarchs. Okay. Follow along with me again. They hurried away, But when they reached the next hall, a silence welcomed them. This is way too quiet for our class. Do you think they've already left? Emmy worried. The group passed displays filled with jewels, robes, and headdresses, but there was no sign of their class. James stopped suddenly. Wait, maybe it's not monarchs as in kings, he said. What other options are there? Ian asked. Remember the butterflies? James asked. I bet we're supposed to see monarch butterflies. Okay, we're going to pause right there for a second. Now, in paragraphs 1 and 2, I need you guys to reread and find maybe, well, let's just stick with that. I need you guys to find everything that creates suspense, just in those top 2 paragraphs. Oh, I'm sorry. So suspense. Suspense is like, you're watching a really good movie, and all of a sudden it's getting to the good part, or maybe you don't know what's going to happen next. Maybe that epic battle's coming up. Maybe something just happened and one of the main characters got hurt, or maybe they're missing, or something like that's happening, and the music starts getting real intense. That creates suspense. So now we have to find things that create suspense in those first 2 paragraphs. Pause your video, write them down, and we'll come back together. Okay, so let's find some things that created suspense. If you said, right in that first sentence, they hurried away, but when they reached the next hall, a silence welcomed them. That creates suspense. Because if their class was in there, you'd hear the bustle and the noise and them talking and all that kind of stuff. It would not be dead silence, right? So that it even says that's way too quiet for our class. Creating suspense. Now, if you also said Emmy was worried, yep. When somebody starts getting nervous, especially in a movie, you know something's going to happen, right? Maybe they're being chased by somebody, or, something along those lines. I don't watch those kind of movies. I can't watch those movies. They make me nervous and anxious, so I can't watch scary movies. But that's creating suspense, right? And then if you continue on, it says there was no sign of their class. They weren't anywhere. That also creates suspense. So those 4 things right there are creating suspense in the story. So you're interested to see what happens next, right? Well, let's keep on reading. Remember the butterflies? James asked. I bet we're supposed to see monarch butterflies. Well, we won't have too much time to find them if we hurry back to the guard, Mrs. Roberts said, checking her watch anxiously. Caitlin pointed to a wall. Look, a map. Maybe we can find another way to the exhibit without having to go back. Ian quickly deciphered it. Here's an exhibit called Magnificent Monarchs and Stunning Swallowtails. It's just down those stairs. They quickly descended the stairs. There, they could see an exhibit, but it was enclosed in glass and had a special entrance. Okay, for paragraphs 3 through 5, we need to know, how do Miss Roberts and the students feel? So what are some, what are some pieces of evidence that find out how the students and Miss Roberts both feel? Now, they might be feeling something different. They might be feeling the same. But how are they feeling? Pause your video and come back when you have your answer wrote down. Okay, so if you said that Miss Roberts feels anxious or nervous, you're correct. Because right here, if we reread again, it says, Mrs. Roberts checking her watch anxiously. She was worried they weren't going to meet them in time, that they wouldn't have time to get back to the guard. So she was a little nervous that they missed her bus, right? Now, if you go down to Caitlin and Ian, They both said, "Look, a map. Maybe we can find another way. It's just down those stairs." So they were both pretty confident. They were excited. They were uh, kind of overjoyed that they found a way to find the other kids in the class without having to backtrack. So they were pretty happy. Miss Roberts, not so much. She was a little anxious and nervous, but they were confident that they'd be able to find them before the end of class. Okay, let's go on to the next page. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. Okay. As they waited impatiently to enter, the group peered into the exhibit. "There they are," James exclaimed. "Our class?" Caitlin asked. "The kinds of butterflies I saw earlier," James replied. "Look," Ian said, pointing to their teacher, "our class is here too. We got here just in time." Inside the exhibit, they rejoined their class. As butterflies flapped and danced above their heads, the others excitedly blurted out facts they had learned. "I found out that monarchs travel long distances," a fellow classmate informed James. "They move together in colonies or groups," another chimed in. James gave his mother a knowing look and said, "They're not the only ones." Okay, so on this page, I want you to think about this question down here at the bottom. So, how is the problem that the group faces in this story similar to a problem in another story you've read? So, you've read, let's see, Whitewater Adventure, right? Where they work together to solve problems. We're going to be reading Second Day First Impression, which, based on the skill this week of problem solution, we can be confident and say we know there's going to be a problem that they're going to have to solve. So, how is this story similar to a problem in another story you've read? So, think back to Whitewater Adventure. Once you have your answer, you can go ahead and unpause the video. Okay, so in this story, who was working together? We had James, right? We had Ian, we had Caitlin, we had Emmy, and Miss Roberts, the chaperone. So they all kind of worked together to find out where the class was. Somebody mentioned that it wasn't monarchs as in kings and queens, it was monarchs as in butterflies. Somebody looked at a map. Miss Roberts asked the guard where they were. Somebody else said that they heard the students and it was just down the hall. So everybody played their own part in finding a solution to the problem. Now, in Whitewater Adventure, think back. They were what? On a rafting trip, right? The raft got stuck. There was rain coming. There was a bear on the horizon. All this kind of stuff was happening, right? And it caused a big problem. So now, in that story, do you remember who solved the problem? It was the daughter, right? She used her oar. She got the raft stuck off of a rock. And then they all went and solved the problem. They were able to make it home before it rains, and nothing got damaged by the bear. So during this next story, which is going to be Second Day First Impression, I need you guys to pay close attention to any problems or solutions that are happening and how everybody's working together to solve that problem. Okay, that's just a little preview for the story coming up. So I will see everybody later. Have a good night. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Bye, everybody.